Look at this face. In the world of forensic psychology, we often look for a motive, revenge, money, passion. But for Wade Wilson, the man they call the Deadpool killer, the motive was far more chilling. He did it because he wanted to.
In this case, the totality of the circumstances indicates the defendant, with premeditation, beat and strangled Kristine Melton in her home before stealing her vehicle and driving to meet his girlfriend, Melissa Montanez. After Montanez refused to get into the car with him, the defendant battered her in broad daylight. The defendant told law enforcement, when Ms. Montanez managed to flee from the defendant, he fled the scene and drove back to Cape Coral, where he decided that he would murder another person. He saw Diane Ruiz walking to work and pulled over, pretending to ask for directions. She got into the car to provide directions, but the defendant strangled her when she tried to exit. He then drove to an empty lot, strangling her into unconsciousness at least one additional time on the way there. When she tried to flee from the car, he drove over her at least one time, inflicting mortal injuries to her spine, ribs, and neck.
In 2019, two women were murdered within hours of each other. Kristine Melton was strangled in her own home. Diane Ruiz was lured into a car, strangled, and then, in an act of pure industrial cruelty, Wilson ran her over with a car until she looked like spaghetti. This was not a crime of a desperate man. This was the work of a predator who told his own father, "I just wanted to do it." Watch his body language.
The evidence showed that both murders were heinous, atrocious, and cruel, and that the second murder was cold, calculated, and premeditated. The defendant inflicted serious physical and emotional pain to the victims. Moreover, the defendant committed the murders while on probation for prior felony convictions, and he committed two first-degree murders contemporaneously with each other and with grand theft of a motor vehicle, battery, and burglary of a dwelling. There were no statutory mitigating circumstances that were established, but the court considered the non-statutory mitigating circumstances presented by the defendant. Out of 13 enumerated non-statutory mitigating factors, the court found that 10 had been established. Out of those established, 6 were given little weight. The totality of the mitigating circumstances indicates that the defendant suffers from drug use from a young age, along with undiagnosed and untreated mental health issues of some kind. He felt abandoned by his biological parents, but had a devoted adoptive family who raised him in a supportive and loving environment. Defendant did not resist law enforcement when arrested and confessed fully to both murders. The court has further considered giving great weight to the advisory verdict of the jury, who recommended that the death penalty be imposed by a vote of 9-3 on count 1 for the murder of Kristine Melton and a vote of 10-2 on count 4 for the murder of Diane Ruiz. The court recognizes that there is no mathematical formula for considering the aggravating and mitigating factors. It is not enough to weigh the number of aggravators against the number of mitigators. The court carefully considered the nature and quality of each aggravator and mitigator. Having reviewed all of the aggravating factors proven beyond a reasonable doubt and all of the mitigating circumstances reasonably established by the evidence, the court finds that the aggravating factors greatly outweigh mitigating circumstances. Given the facts of the case, nothing in defendant's background or mental state would suggest that a death sentence is inappropriate.
While the families of his victims cry in the gallery, Wilson sits with a smirk. His face is covered in tattoos that he added after his arrest. This is what we call antisocial personality disorder in its purest form. He is not just a killer, he is a performer. He knows the cameras are watching, and he is playing the role of the monster.
This court's review of other reported capital cases has led the court to conclude that the death penalty is not disproportionate in this case. Under the totality of the circumstances and evidence, the court finds no basis to override the jury's verdict. The totality of the circumstances warrants that the defendant, Wade Stephen Wilson, be sentenced to death for each count of first-degree murder. Accordingly, it is ordered and adjudged that the defendant, Wade Stephen Wilson, be sentenced as follows: Count 1, first-degree murder of Kristine Melton. The defendant is hereby sentenced to death. Count 2, grand theft of a motor vehicle. The defendant is sentenced to 5 years imprisonment in the Florida Department of Corrections. Count 3, battery. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 364 days in the Lee County Jail. Count 4, first-degree murder of Diane Ruiz. The defendant is hereby sentenced to death. Count 5, the burglary of a dwelling. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 15 years imprisonment in the Florida Department of Corrections. Count 6, petty theft. The defendant is hereby sentenced to 364 days in the Lee County Jail. The defendant is given credit for all time served on this case on all counts. All counts are to run concurrent with each other, meaning at the same time. All statutorily mandated fines, fees, and costs as announced on the record are imposed, and the defendant is committed to the custody of the Department of Corrections for execution of this sentence as provided by law. The defendant is hereby notified that these convictions and sentences are subject to automatic review by the Florida Supreme Court. If he cannot afford an attorney to represent him in any appeal, the court will appoint one for him. Are there any other matters to present to the court?
We are now in May 2026, and the master file on Wade Wilson has a new chapter. He is currently on death row, but his legal team is fighting. They are taking his case to the U.S. Supreme Court. Why? Because the jury that sentenced him was not unanimous. They voted 9-3 for death. Under the old law, he would have lived. Under the new Florida law, he must die. The question for 2026 is, will the highest court in the land save the man who showed no mercy? Sentencing in the Wade Wilson case wasn't just about a punishment. It was about a change in the law. In 2024, Judge Nicholas Thompson did what many thought was impossible under the old rules. He sentenced Wilson to death without a unanimous jury. By a vote of 9-3 for Melton and 10-2 for Ruiz, the jury decided Wilson's fate. But as we sit here in May 2026, the question remains, can the state of Florida retroactively apply a new death penalty law to a 2019 crime? Wilson's team says no. The state says his crimes were so heinous and cruel that the rule change doesn't matter. The U.S. Supreme Court may be the final judge of that. Wade Wilson remains one of the most polarizing figures in modern crime. To some, he is a broken man. To the state of Florida, he is a monster that must be removed.
Not from the state judge.
All right, sir, then, Mr. Wilson, you will be fingerprinted and remanded to the Sheriff's Department. You'll be held without bond and for transport to the Department of Corrections when it's appropriate. If nothing else, then we're adjourned. And I'll give you your copies.
What do you see when you look at these tattoos? A cry for help or a warning? Drop your analysis in the comments.